Hey guys, it's Pedro back with another interview, this time covering League of Legends. And for this occasion, it's going to be a vastly different compared to the usual interviews that I do with players and coaches and anything else of them. Like I have here with me members of Riot Games, or more so specifically the LoL Games Esports administrative staff. For exactly who they are Zack Elliot, the director of the NACL, which was back then in charge of the Tier-2 league within North American League of Legends. And the one up top of me, it is Carlos Antunes, the head of League of Legends Esports in the Americas. So really do appreciate you guys taking the time. And of course, we're going to be talking about the recent news that have just hit the LoL esports scene, specifically talking about the Tier-2 announcement for the Americas for 2025. And so give my thanks to you guys for making this happen. So, my question, first and foremost, might it's gonna be mostly more towards Carlos, but Zach can kind of chime in if you can. I mean, it's a pretty interesting approach in having the formation of this new format for the Tier-2 scene in League of Legends, because when I see that on first view, as someone that covers Valorant, the first thought that came to mind that was, oh, this is basically an inspiration from VCT in Tier-1, because like we got this major shuffle of there now being three partnership leagues, and then also like kind of the creation of the Tier-2 system that feeds into said partnership leagues. And so the kind of question I want to ask you first and foremost is just how much inspiration was there in consideration behind the creation of the Tier-2 scene in the Americas specifically?
You wanna take this, Zach?
Sure. Yeah, I can. So just take a step back for a second. I've been actually working a lot on the broader Tier-2 planning for Americas next year. So chances are I could actually take a lot of the contextual questions, since I've been branching out beyond just the NACL. As for your specific question, so for us, when designing the Americas Tier-2 ecosystem next year, there was sort of a couple of big considerations. I think for NACL and CBLOL Academy, we saw a lot of, or we have seen a lot of success in terms of player promotion over the last couple of years. I mean, if you follow the NACL and LCS, I'm sure you're familiar with like APA, Yeon, Busio, these sort of names that have seen that upward mobility. So for those leagues, it was a lot about redesigning them to fit into the new Americas model and ladder up into this new promotion tournament system. And then for LRN and LRS, those existed previously in Latin America as these sort of qualifiers. And for us heading into next year, it's a lot more about investing in those leagues to actually build them up into leagues that are hopefully on par with NACL and CBLOL Academy next year. So yeah, that's sort of our general approach when it comes to looking at other things like the Valorant ecosystem. I know that's something that you mentioned. I mean, obviously there are parallels between the Valorant system and the League ecosystem. So we definitely talked to that team to learn more about sort of the context behind like how they approach the ecosystem and the decisions they made. But for us, a lot of it was about looking at our goals for the League ecosystem and how we can best set up our Tier-2 towards our guest slot system in the LTA and that sort of thing. And to really start about what do we think is the best fit for our ecosystem.
Going even to the leagues that are we're going to see in Tier-2 for Americas, we saw the continuation of the NACO and the CBLOL Academy, but we got new creations of the regional leagues in Latin America, specifically the LRN and the LRS. What kind of brought about just sort of also the continuation of the NACO and CBLOL Academy, but also the creation of these two new leagues for Latin America specifically?
Yeah, so a lot of sort of what I was talking about, the idea of wanting to invest in LATAM. Historically, LRN and LRS existed, but it acted much more as qualifiers into the LLA. Now that we have the new sort of conference system in the LTA, our goal is to really sort of grassroots invest in a lot of the Latin American Tier-2 ecosystem. So if you've seen the announcement, then you can see that they are going to be fully fledged competitive leagues that we want to treat very similarly and as seriously as NACL and CBLOL Academy, which is also changing its name to. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but I'm gonna do my best. The Circuito Desafiante. Kako can tell me if I nailed that or not. So yeah, I mean, we're really excited about that sort of ecosystem. And then apologies, was there anything else that you wanted me to touch on around that question, or?
More so like I kind of asked the why the continuation of those two aforementioned leagues, NACL and the league that you mentioned, the one that you just said, and then the creation of the two regional leagues in Latin America specifically.
Yeah, so for NACL and CBLOL Academy, or CD going forward, it's much more about sort of capitalizing on the success that I think we've seen over the last couple of years, especially with a lot of the player the upward sort of player mobility. It's sort of it's going to be an interesting challenge heading into next year, because the tier 2 ecosystem for the Americas will have sort of two primary goals. One is about trying to get the best new talent up into the tier 1 ecosystem and make sure they have sort of a competitive foundation across all 4 of our tier 2 leagues. But then 2 is also this new promotion tournament and guest slot system, which is, I think the hopefully most exciting change for next year. I'm a little biased being on the tier 2 side, but I think it's a really exciting change, because it unlocks entirely new opportunities for players and organizations. I mean, speaking in terms of like, but specifically for the path to the promotion tournament is sort of a new element of the ecosystem. It should enable entirely new opportunities for players, organizations, and the main feedback we've heard for the current or previous iterations of the ecosystem on tier 2 was just that, like, tier 2 is great as an opportunity for organizations, but it was ultimately a capped and closed ecosystem. And so by providing this direct access to the promotion tournament and to tier 1 through these guest slots, there's a never seen before level, or at least not in a great long time, access to all of the opportunities afforded at the tier 1 level. The GRP system, talking about some of the financials, which I'm sure we can touch on a little bit later, access to tier 1 viewership for sponsors, and then access to all of the tier 1 major international events, like MSI and Worlds. The tier 2 teams have never had access to those. So we're really excited about thinking about all of the tier 2 leagues as, dedicated pathways towards this new ecosystem going forward.
Kind of want to now touch upon the format, and specifically it's kind of similar to what we're going to see in tier 1, in the sense that, like, we're going to see for this first split of tier 2 the fearless draft, and that will be kind of getting into that, and then split 2 will be double round robin, best of ones, and then that will then lead to the promotion tournament at the very end of the year. And so kind of want to ask either of you guys, or if you guys are able to answer, what was the thought process behind, trying to reflect the format for tier 2 just as it is in tier 1? And also, what kind of question that I also want to ask regarding the fearless draft is, why only the first split of, like, the year, and not kind of use that the same way for the rest of the year? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah. So I gotta say, I love Fearless Draft. It's been so much fun seeing it sort of play out over the NACL and a lot of our tier 2 leagues at the end of last year, heading into like the Americas Challengers event, which also used Fearless. And then globally next year for the first split, they're also going to be using Fearless. So it's been a very exciting format to experiment with and test out and see how fans are reacting to it. Which is why we're really excited to have it be the standard for the first split. Specifically on the question of how come it isn't in the second split, the main reason around that is, as much fun as it would be, tier 1 split 3 is not going to be using Fearless Draft. Theirs is just for their first split. And so ultimately, if we have a guest slot that's trying to defend their slot, we don't want to put them or the tier 2 teams competing against them in a position where they don't have the same format. So we want to make sure that whatever format we're using for the qualification and the promotion tournament is the same, so that we can have a super competitive tournament where all the teams are sort of on the same field. More generally, in terms of our philosophy behind the format next year, wanting to capture Fearless Draft was definitely a priority, because we not only from the fan engagement side, which is, I'm sure, like part of the reason why they're using it for tier 1 and the first global event. But then also on the developmental side, we've seen a lot of benefits too, because it essentially encourages players to have a much deeper champion pool. And so it's been really valuable on the tier 2 side as well for that reason, and sort of pushing players and also coaches to limit test their abilities in terms of the drafting and being able to play different champions. For the second split, it is all about the promotion tournament. So that's why specifically you mentioned it's only BO1s for the regular season. The idea is when we start in high level, hey, we have this much time for the split. What makes the most sense? The priority was on having a very meaty and intense playoffs bracket. So specifically for NACL and CD, it's going to be 8 teams in playoffs, so 8 out of the 10 teams competing in the league. So the idea is, calendar-wise, if we have a limited time, we want to have a very sort of strong pathway to the actual promotion tournament qualification. And so it's less time on the regular season, more times in playoffs. So that way we can really ensure that every team has like a very intense competition heading into that. And ultimately, the best teams are the ones that are making it into the promotion tournament.
More so just having like a lot of flexibility available for the teams that will kind of contend, for that guest spot for 2026, right?
Yeah.
This was one of our biggest concerns while designing not only the guest slot on tier 1, but also changing what we had to change on tier 2 is that we make those 2 tiers competitive, and there is some parity that will help us and as years go by to get players more and more ready to be tier 1 ready players if the team qualifies. So we know that given the total separation that the 2 tiers had because of franchising, there are some gaps. We had a lot of teams on tier 1 using academy teams in the tier 2 historically. So even the concept of the development, it's a great runway to offer players a steady platform to develop their competitiveness, to belong to a bigger org. But it's also not the end game of those teams to qualify into tier 1 because they are preparation for a roster that already exists. So we had many things to play with, so we could make those 2 tiers get closer together. And our goal is that those more competitive playoffs, those more cutthroat formats will deliver better prepared tier 2 teams that are eligible to put up a good fight and eventually snatch back the gas slot. So we can also see the renewal of talent on tier 1. So if we just connected the tiers through the availability of the slots, we might not see tier 2 teams who are being pulled to their limits enough to be competitive at the promo relegation tournament, at the promotional tournament. So all those changes that we made on the calendar, on the formats and the splits, on having bigger playoffs and everything else, is to prepare those tier 2 teams to develop even faster, so they are actually tier 1 material when it gets to the promotional tournament. So all these was made to make tier 1 even stronger and to get the influx of players more incentivized to get like those players ready to play on tier 1. So there are many small things that we're still going to observe. We are coming from different. We're still having 2 splits. We have additional qualifications in the middle of the year, so we're going to be observing a lot of things. But our objective is to get tier 2 a more accelerated platform for development, with a big goal in the end, which is you can actually make it to tier 1. So all those things will probably give us some learnings, and we're very open to make adjustments for the next season. But the idea is that tier 2 is actually more and more connected and closer to tier 1. So those promotional relegations, they actually push tier 1 to a higher limit. So, and that's how the pursuit to competitiveness in the Americas will go. So there is also this objective of having tier 2 push tier 1 to a higher level, so teams can have actually to defend their positions. So all these thoughts that Zack shared have this objective to push the bar higher to all tiers and get players more and more ready to, if they make it, they are already pulling up a good fight with the franchise teams.
Kind of wanted to ask you now, specifically to you, Carlos, just sort of thoughts on just how you've seen the past versions of Tier 2, that led up to this point. Obviously, we've seen plenty of iterations for the Tier 2 scene, specifically more recently in North America. Excuse me if I am if I not familiar with Tier 2 scene in North America, not in Latin America and Brazil, but still like specifically in North America, we've seen the NA Academy, with the Tier 1 orgs, fielding academy teams, and in that paved the way for to proving grounds, and then kind of had that go hand in hand with the Academy League, and then that kind of then led to NACL before it got into where we're at right now. And so, what do you feel was the biggest takeaways from just having those past iterations of the league? What has been some of the most difficult challenges in trying to kind of um, continue those kinds of leagues in the past, and and how have you kind of been adjusting from that to where you are right now?
Well, that's a great question because exactly as we had very similar things happening to Tier 2, both in Brazil and North America, through different kinds of iteration happening on CBLOL Academy and an ACL. But in both systems, what we've seen is that in like year over year, we've seen players get faster from Tier 1 to Tier 1, Tier 2 to Tier 1, and quickly showing that their learning curve is at a point that they can still progress within the same year on Tier 1. So we're seeing, just like Zack mentioned, APA, Yeon. In Brazil, we have a number of other players also coming from Tier 2 as academy teams to support Tier 1, that in a year they became like MVPs and all that. So we're seeing those players getting more and more ready faster into Tier 1, and they're still at a point in their careers that they are in the learning curve. So their relationship with the learning, with the coaches, and with the players, the other players, and ramping up with the team has brought a lot of success. So we've seen the renewal of our talent pool moving a lot faster. And this comes out of all those iterations on Tier 2, where Tier 2, little by little, stopped being a parallel league with less incentives to progress, and eventually now becomes an actual path to pro into Tier 1. So we had the fully academy teams, and then we had another iteration where we had independent teams that had another kind of drive. So we had to do different kinds of experiences for the pro players, academy teams and independent teams. Then we tried in the Americas Challenger, where we put all the teams in the Americas together. So the competitive bar was put a little bit higher than that. And when we opened the path to pro, simply just having players coming from like the outside in was not our solution for improving the performance levels in the Americas, but being another iteration in this format. So we've also seen in Brazil 4 or 5 players a year, especially in Furia, Vibucade, and Loud. They were also coming from Tier 2, playing at CBLOL at a very good level, making their first time at Worlds and MSI, like years before than the peers from the previous generation. So we saw those 2 things happening at the same time. So why don't we put all the formats together, get the lessons learned, and then that was our idea, to accelerate even more and create one more step for those players into Tier 1 as the guest teams. And one thing that we mentioned here about LATAM, in Latin America, we know that there is a huge potential not only for the community to connect more with the sports, and we're making a lot of changes in the product so fans from North and South can connect to their teams. We also had most of the teams in LLA somehow making to the LTA, either through direct participation or merges. So we had almost all teams are here. But we always knew that there were also pro players eager for a broader path to pro in Latin America. So breaking all again back into the 2 regions, North and South, will give more chances for those players to find their ways into their conferences, especially in the South. Once the league moved to Mexico, we struggled a lot to keep players in the South interested in getting to the path to pro, because there was a much bigger change in their lives to make to another country, another part of the continent. LRS now also puts the path into competitive play a lot closer to them in a league in the Southern Hemisphere. So for LATAM, we are very excited to get all these experiments and all these iterations to also foster a scene that we know have really good players. So we're also going to see another version of this iteration with a brand new territory that now gets a Tier 2 that connects into Tier 1. So all the ideas were to accelerate, get those players faster into Tier 1, get teams experiment more with more players, and learning, changing again, improving, getting the experience from 4 regions now, connecting to the same league. So that was our objective.
Can I add in just one extra thought on that? If that's
Go ahead.
okay.
Yes.
So you mentioned proving grounds, and so as soon as you said that, like my ears lit up because I'm like, ooh, I remember when we worked on that. One thing that I'll just say that I'm really personally excited about, and I think something that we've seen, if you think about like the ecosystem over the last, I don't know, like 5+ years, specifically in North America, is that when we had the old Academy model, it was a closed ecosystem. So Academy had a lot of benefits, obviously, in terms of like the or in terms of the what's the right word? Basically, just like the consistency, right? That kind of structure provides. But what we ended up seeing over time was that essentially our tier 3 ecosystem was really drying up. It was not in a great space because all of these tier 2 opportunities were locked behind essentially, you had to get on an academy team. That was the only way to beat at tier 2. So with events like Proving Grounds in the past, we sort of, it was, unfamiliar at the time, but just the concept of tier 2 academy teams versus non-academy teams, those type of events were something that we wanted to introduce so that we could increase outside investment and rebuild the tier 3 ecosystem, because the main feedback we heard from our amateur community was like, hey, there's just not a lot of competitive opportunities for us. And it's either you're on an academy team or there isn't really an alternative. So I think when you look at like the historical context of like the old ecosystem in tier 2 versus what we've been building to over the last couple of years, increasing by opening it up more and more, I think we're seeing increased investment from these external organizations. And now with direct access to tier 1, I think it's not only going to lead to like the highest stakes for tier 2 that it's had in years, but as we've seen with organizations like Luminosity joining the NACL, there's a lot of other organizations that are very interested, which is also why we want to have dedicated qualifier slots for all of the tier 2 leagues heading into next year, because we know that there's more interest than there has been in a long time in tier 2, and that's something that we think is going to be really healthy for the ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of now want to go into just sort of the GRP, real quick. It kind of, you already touched upon that a little bit, Zach, earlier on in the conversation. And so kind of want to ask like a two-parter question here. Obviously we're going to see the GRP get divided into different parts of the league ecosystem, specifically focusing on tier 1. We're going to see like 50% of that going to the tier 1 teams. And interestingly enough, it's going to be no GRP kind of revenue split towards tier 2. Might be wrong. You can kind of elaborate on that. Still, why is there no like GRP split for these tier 2 teams for this upcoming year? And then kind of on top of that, kind of, well, so for first off, we can kind of answer about that question first off. So if you guys
Sure.
would like to.
Sure, I can do that. So our idea with the GRP, the model, the business model that we have is a solution for the problem that we were trying to solve, which is make our team partners sustainable. So on tier 1 specifically, we had as we had all the franchises, we had long-term partners that had invested for years or a decade almost, and they were. Their expectations of returns on those investments were high. Our expectation also to deliver to those investments was also a priority. So as we the main goal that we had on looking for sustainability is to enable our partners to have access to a significant revenue. And the previous business model that we had, where we used to share revenue over the local sponsorship. So each one of the leagues had a business, and this business will share the revenues between the teams competing on that league and the local league. That was not growing as a business model to the extent that we expected to deliver to teams. And also, so teams can also keep on investing for the future of the league. So the idea of not only creating a business model where revenue doesn't come necessarily from the sponsorships that the league has, but from Riot's core business, which is the digital content in the game, was one of the moves. So we anchor our business model into something that's more sustainable and it's more connected to Riot's core business. And the second move was to also revisit the number of partners that we had, because while we do understand that the revenues that we get as we split content revenue are bigger than sponsorship revenues, we also understand that we had a very big number, more than 100 teams competing in like more than 10 leagues around the world. So optimizing and revisiting that structure, that global footprint was also an idea. So by reducing the number of teams and having a healthier revenue model, we could make sure that each one of our partners had access to a much more significant revenue profile in the future. So being sure that we do not spread this new revenue model over a larger amount of teams to the point it doesn't become relevant again and it's not enough to maintain their investment was a big concern. So the idea to have the tier 1 being connected to the current GRP model, the model where we split the game content in a global basis. So all digital content sold around the world is going to be split around the leagues and the teams that play in tier 1 globally. So that was a solution that we found immediately for tier 1. Sustainability for tier 1 is also a concern of ours because we do have to make sure that those players and those teams joining the system, they find a runway to be there for a long time while they grow and they invest and they progress. We have additional measures for that we isolate in tier 2, and that as we grow the tier 2 business, as we grow the tier 2 leagues and the engagement and the popularity of the products, that business will grow as well. So in the last couple of years, we've been trying mostly on an NACL, a couple of business models with our partners, tournament organizers, where there is also a revenue share with the teams. But it's the revenue share connected to the revenue generated on tier 2. So this is where we believe that, especially now with the new revamped tier 2 product, we still have a big avenue to grow. And that's our idea. Each one of the tiers, each one of the parts of the sport should be sustainable, should be profitable, and we find different alternatives to foster the sustainability of our partners at that level. So not choosing a one-fits-all solution will help us get to the different needs of the teams and on a quicker time. So sharing revenues that come from tier 2 with the teams, working on the incentives of tier 1, tier 2 teams to get into tier 1, that also brings a huge lift on the revenue profile for those teams. Creating more flexible policies so that teams on tier 2 can also monetize their business some other ways. That's how we see tier 2 going. And then as we get the whole business of the sport in a bigger scale, we can start crossing incentives. But for now, our idea is that we do see a space for tier 2 as a business to grow, and there are specific initiatives for that. On tier 1, our concern is to revert a trend where we can actually now start to give more and more relevant revenues for the partners that have been investing with us for years and years and years. So we're isolating the two systems, but the mindset and then the strategy is the same. It comes from the league growing, generating revenues and sharing with the teams, just at different scales and different times.
Want to give a quick question about the teams that will be taking part in Tier 2. I know, Zach, you mentioned Luminosity getting into it. Just out of curiosity, are the teams that are announced that will be taking part in these 4 regional leagues in Tier 2, those that are not going to get into it via via qualifiers, are they also going to be like partner teams, or once the season starts, is it just going to be like whatever it is the case, whoever gets in, whoever gets out?
Yeah, so the only difference in classification for tier 2 teams is academy teams. They have sort of separate rules since they can't play in the promotion tournament, and then all the other teams. So the way that we approach next year and finalizing all the teams is, one, looking at all of the previous partners from this year, being like, okay, cool, like we want to make sure that anyone who wants to carry over into the new ecosystem is able to do so. But then 2, we had essentially opportunities for new teams to enter the ecosystem. So for NACL specifically, obviously Disguise, got the guest slot for next year. So we have a slot there, as well as, changes in academy teams. So the idea is we'll have qualifiers at the beginning of next year for all of the tier 2 leagues, and then they will essentially fill out the full 8 to 10 team rosters or leagues, and then going forward it's just going to be the promotion relegation mechanics that'll sort of apply in there.
Kind of, you kind of brought up an interesting point, Zach. Disguised. I want to ask Carlos if you want. I mean, there's plenty of orgs that were in North American League heading into 2025, and Disguised was the one that was added in as the guest team, guest slot team for 2025, starting out in Tier 1. What was the thought process behind just kind of having that team getting into it on Tier 1 starting in next year?
Well, we were looking for the initial guest slots, the teams that we invited to join the league on year 1, both North and South. We chose teams that we had worked before. They're all teams in the system. We've been partnering with them before. That had shown performance. This guys has won an ACL, and they have also identified and worked with players that were playing on Tier 1 on LCS in the summer split. So they were very close to what we understand the guest team should be to play on even rounds. And also because as we work with an ACL with these guys, we have also entered a couple of initiatives where we connected in other dimensions of what we understand esports should be, like content creation, communication, engagement with the fans, and all that. So that would be that was a really good match of visions from these guys and from us of what we also want Tier 1 to be. So we do understand that these guys brings to the league the many dimensions that we understand. We also understand that Tier 1 teams should be reaching out to their fans, should be engaging their fans, should be promoting the league. And these guys from the very beginning, they showed this potential and capacity with an ACL. In the same fashion, in the South, we had Isurus that was not selected as a partner team, but we also understand that Isurus is definitely a Tier 1 performing team. They do have a fandom. They're also at the same even ground. So both guest teams, they help grow the league and position the league and the guest slots the way we want. The guest slot should be Tier 1 ready, should be Tier 1 material in many dimensions. So those partnerships with the guest teams, they were made based on those strategic visions, which are the teams that can help us present the league, play with the other teams, and show the community what it is a guest team, what we expect from those teams, and how can we add to the mix of the other brands and other contents that we create and other experiences that we offer fans. So this will definitely set the bar for the upcoming guest teams as they come, and they will see what's needed to play to be on a Tier 1 league. It's not necessarily only the gameplay. There are a lot of things in place that I'm pretty sure that Isurus and these guys will set a really good example for those.
I got a few more questions to ask you, because I understand that we might be running low on time, and I don't want to be hit with the sudden stoppage. So there was a press release that was handed out to the media before the announcement of America's Tier 2 was actually announced. And one interesting quote that I kind of want to take out and ask you guys about is, I will read it out to you right here. To ensure that Tier 1 qualifying teams honor their qualification, all teams must be operated by a business entity upon qualification into Tier 2 with a commitment to compete in Tier 1 if promoted. I got a few parts to kind of ask about that question. First off, what exactly do you guys mean by business entity? And also, in addition to that, is it so that any kind of business entity can kind of get into the scene and kind of support a team, if they see an opportunity to get into Tier 1? Or is there a cap into what kind of, entities can kind of get into that?
Yeah, so the context behind this, which I think is helpful to sort of understand, is there's always the question when you have an open qualifier system of what do you do with a team that's just 5 players in a dream? We love that. We think that's like a cool, philosophy behind having an open ecosystem in the first place. The challenge when we're sort of bridging, the path to the guest slot is that when it actually comes time to qualify for the guest slot, there's just certain legal requirements that have to be met as part of actually qualifying for the guest slot, signing up for the league, all getting access to the GRP, all that sort of stuff. So essentially the way that we designed it was just said, hey, you have to have a business entity if you actually qualify into tier 2. So that's your official sort of start to like, all right, now you've made it to the tier 2 level. You're going to be, we want them to essentially be positioned to be able to then compete in the promotion tournament from that point on. So if 5 players just on their own want to qualify and play in the qualifiers, they're totally able to do that. But if they actually qualify, that's when they need a business entity. In terms of what that means, there's a lot of different examples, just means like a limited company or corporate entity. So like LLC, LTD, that sort of thing. So that's essentially the context behind that.
Mm-hmm. Kind of want to ask Carlos about, since we talked about disguise, I want to ask you about 100 Thieves and how that provisional slot is going to work. Of course, when the announcement was made about 100 Thieves getting into that provisional role, the thought process that came from the community was like, okay, well, maybe they're going to phase out of League Esports. And so that said, I kind of want to ask you what exactly is going on.
Hey, Pedro. Yeah, so what we stated in the statement from T1 and then what 100 Thieves has put out, those are all of our statements on the matter.
Okay. All right. That's it. I'll stop right there and ask another question. That said, as we kind of head into to the start of the 2025 season, kind of want to ask both of you guys and just sort of course, we've heard you guys talk about how, this new format will bring in a much more different, much more refreshing take on to how people will engage with the Tier 2 system and, how people kind of look forward into that. What I want to ask you guys is, how will this new format make, the league scene in Tier 2 kind of sustainable in a general sense, as in content revenue, generating fans, I understand you kind of already touched upon that, but more so focusing on that aspect. How will this new format ensure that sustainability will be possible?
I think that the best way to collect all the points that we mentioned about how the league is different from the past that could answer this question is that there is a new purpose for Tier 2 now. And there is a purpose of keeping Tier 1 refreshed. There is a purpose of being an actual path to pro to players that actually have a shot in a regular basis. So all these, the not being a league that happens on the side with zero connection to the pyramid of esports will make this league a more appealing product for organizations that actually want to get into Tier 1. As Zack said, the system was closed before, so there was a limit on the interest or even intent to invest on the system. Now these orgs can find a way again back into LoL Esports. Players have a much faster runway into showing their talent to other teams or getting promoted with their teams into Tier 1. With that, fans will be more interested in watching that because there's a lot more at stake. We've seen that even on Tier 2, the moments that carry into finals on America Challengers and all that moments that created an additional purpose for Tier 2, fans like to watch it because they want to see who's the next player, A or B. So all these movements that came from the change of the final goal of Tier 2 will make the league more appealing for organizations, for players who actually want to invest in their careers, for fans, and we will be helping our partner TOs and to create the content and the stories that will show this happening to fans. And as this wheel starts to turn, we have a totally new business coming up. So instead of having an additional league to be compared as an investment or as a business to Tier 1, we have a part of LoL Esports now. We've seen it happen. We've seen it in past iterations of the business that fans feel attracted about this. Sponsors want to be with teams. Tier 1 teams want to partner with the affiliate teams in Tier 2. Everything starts to happen when there's a final goal that connects into the backbone of the sport. So this is why we believe this is going to be pivotal for Tier 2, because as the purpose changes, everything else starts to follow this, and the whole interest, the hype, the business of Tier 1 ends up cascading also into Tier 2, while in the past, as a separate business, it was a long jump to get. Now it's very much connected. You're muted.
Yeah, I kind of accidentally muted myself. But do you have anything to add on to that, off of what Carlos said, Zach?
Not particularly. I mean, like I said earlier, I'm really excited about the introduction of the guest slot. You know, rebuilding the ecosystem around the Path to Promotion tournament, and as Kako said, like that's access to that guest slot is I mean, it's been, you know, since pre-franchising has that existed. So we're really excited about the new sort of opportunities that will unlock, and in general, I think it should just make Tier 2 a more entertaining product, right? I mean, the stakes for competition are way higher than they ever have been. And so I think that'll also have, you know, as Kako was saying, sort of knock-on effects around just interest in the league.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to cut in too much of your time because I understand you guys are busy. So I kind of want to ask one more question, and then I'll wrap it up. And that is basically, you know, of all the things that we mentioned throughout this conversation, all of the points that we kind of touched upon, both, you know, engagement financially and also like um, kind of systematically. What do you feel is the biggest goal that you guys want to achieve with this first year of this new format of the Tier 2 scene that will tie into the very first year of the LTA? Because, you know, at the end of the day, this is the first time we've seen a new format like this, specifically in the LoL esports scene for this region. So yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm so excited for next year. I think it's gonna be so much fun. If I had to distill it down to a single goal, it is actually seeing how the Path to Promotion tournament plays out, because that's not been something that, you know, we had to necessarily design the ecosystem around when we looked at previous years. But I think it has been the biggest request from teams, from fans, from players when they look at the Tier 2 ecosystem. And so just sort of, I mean, when we were taking the approach of like, cool, you know, how do you want to actually design next year? It was like, all right, well, let's start with the end goal, the promotion tournament, and then work back from there. So that's how we got into the formats for Split 2. And then it's wanting to make sure that Fearless Draft was introduced into that. Everything from, you know, designing the teams, right? Like I mentioned, there's going to be qualifier slots for all of our Tier 2 leagues. That was very intentional. We could have just invited organizations or had an application process or something like that, but nope. We want it to be totally open so that we have dedicated slots for new organizations to enter the ecosystem. So I think it's going to be a pretty volatile year, but hopefully in a way that is more exciting, more engaging, higher stakes than we've seen for Tier 2 in a long time. And I'm really excited about the new opportunities that exist for organizations and just how much fun it's going to be watch as a fan for all these new organizations and high stakes and, you know, overall fun competition.
Carlos?
Nothing more to add. It's about the Path to Pro. It's about giving new orgs a chance to get into Tier 1. It's about bringing this refresh that the whole region in the Americas has been missing for a couple of years, and then our development kind of stalled a bit. So it's about bringing all this pressure from the other sides so that we can go better and we can select the best and we can keep on progressing. Much of our improvement in Brazil, in NA, in the recent year has been attributed to those new players, to the teams that invest in developing new talent. So that's what we wanted to create the bones for, to actually have this built in the system so we can, the league as a whole, the sport in Americas can grow with that. And we're really excited to see that put to a more clear format. I mean, players actually will appear, they will get promoted, the teams will be promoted. Transfer windows will be a lot crazier now because there's a lot more players that the good teams who have been scouting can find. So that's exactly what we wanted, to bring this refreshment to the league, to the region as a whole, and keep on surfing what we're doing now, which is growing year after year as a macro region in the global sport.
Hopefully, we'll be able to see a brighter tier 2 scene once the 2025 season does kick off. And so, Zach, Carlos, thank you so much for taking the time. Really do appreciate answering all of my questions. And this has been Pedro, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Thank you so much.